This is Shlok, and I'm joined by my co-host Aarman, and you're listening to Topical Idiocy, where we discuss topics that we are unqualified to talk about.
Continuing our discussion about elections, this is part two where we're actually going into why are our political elections broken. In the previous one, we had a retroflexion of the Democratic Party primary process with its completion, and now we want to abstract it more. How this system, like why this system is broken, and really understanding what the different layers are of these problems. And just start that
Yeah.
off.
I mean,
Um,
before we start, though, wouldn't you? I feel like it would be a little important to contend that is our political system broken? I mean, I was not happy with how the primary turned out. Were you happy with how the primary turned out?
yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think with I definitely was not happy, and I think even regardless of our ideological positions, um, we discussed our stances as Bernie supporters and how we saw the candidates in the previous parts. But the fact that Joe Biden early on in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in Nevada, didn't command wasn't the people's first choice by a
Mm-hmm.
long shot,
Yeah.
and only to see everyone coalesce around him with the elections sort of coming to an end.
Yeah.
And with most people's preferred choices dropping out, the fact that Biden won as kind of really,
A default.
yeah, as a default option.
That's the thing, right? No one was ever putting their support behind Biden as a result of real faith in what he was bringing to the country or real belief or real hope, right? Hope was what Obama had brought. And even if that was just like an appearance kind of thing, even if that was just a political campaign, it was still something that voters, at least believed in, right? But no one here, and this is a general statement from me, and I'm not qualified to say this, sure, but I don't think anyone was fooling themselves and saying that they believed what Joe Biden was saying. I think they were just trying to be rational. I think that was their decision.
Mhm. And that is, of course, not to discredit that opinion. That comes with different priorities.
Mm.
Um, and of course, that bought into his argument of electability being really the center of why Joe Biden was running. I think also just abstracting it a little bit more and looking beyond just this chaotic primary and going into more, how do we know the system is broken? Well, turnout is incredibly low
Yes. Yeah.
compared to other similar democratic countries. And also just the opinion of Congress, the opinion of the presidency, the opinion of the Supreme Court are at extremely, like they're at really like low lows. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Could we talk about that just for a little bit? So before we started this podcast, right, we were talking about voter turnout. Now,
mhm.
the highest that voter turnout has ever been for a presidential election and this is off of just like a statistics, this is off of a table from Wikipedia, so I'm not sure if you can take this completely, but I'm pretty certain they're not gonna. Actually, you know what?
Again,
The main point is that it was around 55, 57% in 2016, correct? This is true.
mhm.
And then, like, the highest it's been was in 1860. That was when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. That was a long time ago. I mean, so in that way, yeah, voter turnout has been low, especially compared to countries like Australia for good reason, but for other countries,
Which we'll go into soon,
yeah,
don't worry.
absolutely, absolutely.
But even just our European neighbors across the pond, they have much higher turnout and much more faith in the actual systems.
Yeah.
Um, I was reading about some Gallup polls done just marking Congress's, for instance, approval, and only 22%. This is the most recent one done on in uh, March of this year, in which 22% of people surveyed approve the way Congress is handling its job. And it's not like most people in no opinion. 74% disapproved of it. This, of course, has been worse during, for example, I think the government shutdown, both during Obama's presidency and during
Trump's
Trump's
presidency.
presidency,
Yeah.
have caused higher rates of dissatisfaction.
Uh-huh.
But we are not seeing a public that enjoys the work Congress is doing, that likes their representative, loves the representative. And so what do we think about this? Because right now I'm just throwing statistics. How do we actually analyze that?
How do we analyze voter sentiment of senators and congresspeople and politicians, right? That's what you're asking. How do we analyze that? I mean, like, so 2008's voter turnout was considerably higher than 2012's voter turnout, right? When they were voting for Obama as a new face of the Democratic Party, as a new candidate, right? So that was almost when, and this is me maybe this is me interpreting what that sort of positive shift means. I guess a backwards positive shift, I don't know, numerically. But this is me interpreting that as saying that when people think that change can actually happen, right? When people think that there can be a new political force, that they'll come out and that they'll vote for it when they have something that they can believe in. And that was what 2008 was, right? That's what Obama was. But I mean, the reason why voter turnout is low is because there is probably less of a belief that politics can change anything, right? There's the sentiment that, oh, it's all rigged. What's the point of voting? Or, oh, politicians, they don't really do anything. Or, oh, they're just kind of like, there are a lot of stereotypes and there are a lot of cliches that are applied to the occupation and they're applied to just listening to the thing at large, where it's just that, yeah, politicians, they have their own little world and that they're not going to help. And whether these things are true or not, yeah, they matter, but it matters a lot more whether people believe in it, right? Because they are the ones that elect leaders that can then, change things. So if voters don't believe that politicians have that much of an impact, then they're probably not going to turn out for them either. So in a way, I think they're very connected. They're not just two discrete measures, but they are connected to each other. I think they represent each other.
I think like what you're getting to really is the bedrock of why elections are broken, and that's political apathy.
Yeah.
The fact that about 40% of Americans who are eligible to vote choose not to.
Yeah.
Why they choose not to, again, for what you said, they think the system is broken and that their vote doesn't matter and that they can't really do anything to fix it.
Yeah.
And I think what that means, how I perceive that, and just seeing what we have now, members like the Squad, for instance,
The Squad, yeah,
Jayapal,
yeah,
Bernie Sanders,
yeah,
these people who do not align themselves with the Democratic Party directly, who are sort of forming their own wing. Bernie Sanders, for instance, isn't even a part of it still. They ran against incumbents. Bernie Sanders, if we're looking back at 1980s when he first started running, technically he ran against an incumbent. But for AOC, for instance, she ran against someone who was considered likely to challenge Pelosi for leadership for Speaker of the House.
Yeah, yeah.
He was, I think he was.
It's a great movie, by the way. I don't. Have you seen the movie on Netflix?
I haven't seen the movie. No.
Yeah. Sorry, continue, but it's cool. Yeah.
But she was propelled by voter turnout.
Absolutely.
And the problem is, so many people cannot run against incumbents with the force that AOC had. AOC was backed by Justice Democrats.
Yeah.
But even then, their work is limited.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to talk. So I can't really speak to the sort of broader movements in the same way that you can, but I can speak to the way that like some candidates in this previous, like the primary cycle is over. So in this political cycle kind of affected me. Now I ended up supporting Bernie in faith, I haven't like, it was useless ultimately, but Andrew Yang was the guy that I was really, really enthused by. And he was the guy that really motivated me to like spend a lot more time paying attention to this whole process. And Andrew Yang himself was more interesting to listen to just out of a lot of other political candidates because he seemed to have very interesting political positions and everything. But what was fascinating to me about him was that his support group was a lot of people that were self-described as politically apathetic. Uh, a lot of his support group were people who said that I've never voted for anyone before. I've never believed in the political process. I've never felt like politicians were speaking out to me. So I never voted. But
Mhm.
this is a candidate that I believe in. This is a candidate who seems to actually have the same values as I do, right? And I don't want to get like too provocative or anything, but it wasn't, no one ever said like, this is a candidate who shares the same race as I do. No, this is not the candidate who shares the same like gender or whatever. I mean, what I mean by that is like identity politics is a thing that we see a lot in the Democratic Party right now, but that's not a thing that's as important of a
Mhm.
force apparently as
It
values are.
doesn't tap into those disenfranchised voters.
It doesn't. No.
40%.
No. And
The
even if it applies, apparently disenfranchised voters care more about policy positions and how politicians can help them specifically rather than if a politician can relate to them, if that
Mhm.
even makes sense. I mean, saying it out loud, it seems to only make sense, right? Like that seems to be the only thing that would make sense, right? You would care for what a
Mhm.
person does for you, not if you'd have a beer with them, not if you want to like, talk to them more, not if they seem relatable. So that's what Andrew Yang was to me, right? Andrew Yang to
Mhm.
me was this guy who like, he seemed like this very, analytical, mathematically focused guy who was looking at a problem in a new way. And he sort of brought out like a lot of politically apathetic voters and he built a whole coalition around him. And
Mhm.
AOC did the same thing, right? So Yang didn't win, but if you see Yang right now, in a way, he's kind of done well for himself. He's on CNN constantly. He has a huge Twitter following now. He's mentioned a lot. And because of the coronavirus pandemic right now, there's a lot of renewed interest in the idea of a universal basic income, right? These
Mhm.
kind of ideas become more valuable when people aren't doing that well. And that's what Yang was talking about.
Mhm.
But all of that being said, my point is that these candidates, when they build coalitions around themselves, especially of people that are, disenfranchised voters, disengaged voters, they can bring out a political force that's a lot stronger than what party establishment can bring out, and that's what we're going to talk about too. I'm sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and going into that from more the Republican side of things, Donald Trump was able, because of his celebrity status, had a broad appeal even to the people, even to those disenfranchised voters.
Yeah,
They
for
knew
sure.
him before he ran. They knew him while he ran. They supported him. And what I think, I disagree with you slightly. That I don't think it's so much about policies, but how you present your goal, your vision.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, for sure.
And what Bernie Sanders, what Andrew Yang, what Donald Trump um, did is they included those disenfranchised voters not as people who would help them propel them to the presidency, but someone who would they would include them in their vision. Their presidency would be not targeting, but supporting those people who help them get to the point where get to a better place.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
one common critique of the Democratic Party is that it rides on the back of Black and Hispanic voters without actually giving much to them. I think that's why we saw Bernie Sanders' huge appeal to Hispanic voters and to younger. Joe Biden uh, had a broader appeal to African Americans. Bernie Sanders still had a decent appeal to younger African Americans as well.
Hmm.
And I think that's in part why.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, what I meant by policy is it's unrealistic to sort of think that all of Yang's voters were looking at all of his individual policies. But his presentation, at least, was definitely more policy minded, and at least his campaign was more around what he was going to do rather than what he was going to sort of continue maintaining. And I think that kind of
Mhm.
change was already interesting. AOC was like, being a democratic socialist, she already presented like a different kind of idea and path
Yeah.
for a lot
I
of
don't know if she
voters.
was necessarily like
Did she counter? She didn't. No, she wasn't a
I don't
democratic
believe so.
socialist while she was running. Sure.
I don't believe so. I think she classified herself as a progressive.
I
But
see.
like the thing with about her, she used the whole being a bartender, being
Yeah.
a working class member to say that my support and my focus while being in Congress would be about
Yeah.
who I was back then.
Yeah.
And realizing the struggles of what she had to go through and realizing the countless Americans that have to go through that. That's the wave she rode on.
There's kind of a meta win with AOC as well that I find really interesting because there's always this kind of idea that like why even care about politics? It's always the same people running, it's always the same people winning, it's all rigged, right? It doesn't matter. But AOC,
Mhm.
by running, first of all, she posits the idea that anyone can run, and that's already a renewed interest in what is a democracy, right? Like that's
Mhm.
her with no political experience. She was 29. She was a bartender. I
Mhm.
guess she was 28 when she was running. Math. But she was a bartender, and she didn't have any political experience. She went to college for a different degree, for a different kind of area of study. And then, she won, and that kind of showed itself that, yeah, it's possible to win, and it's possible to represent people and not be part of the establishment,
Mhm.
which is always kind of a fun argument that I have with myself a lot, where like, I don't know, this drives away from the point, but I think that what she represented was really good in the sense of that it was like optimism, and it was part of this bigger movement of a lot of politicians that came out of the woods that were trying to change, and they were trying to invigorate a
Mhm.
bunch of disenfranchised voters, and that still hasn't completely happened yet, but I think it's happening, so that's cool.
Mhm.
But
I think that helps to turn faith back into the system from those 40%
yeah,
of people.
uh-huh.
I think what Shlok and I discussed a little bit before the podcast, um, like why don't we see more of these people is that, well, I mentioned this before. Justice Democrats is a group of um, political consultants who are trying to really shift the Democratic Party more to the left
Hmm.
and adding more progressives.
Hmm.
Uh, and on the other side, we have the DCCC. It's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, something like that. Essentially, they're responsible for helping incumbent Democrats, people who already hold their office, to stay in power.
Yeah.
And seeing what the DCCC does is when you challenge a progressive and when you challenge an incumbent, let's say Shlok, you are who is running against Nancy Pelosi in the primary right now?
Shahid Buther, Butha.
Booth,
I don't know
Buttar.
his last name. He's Indian, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But he's
yeah.
currently challenging Pelosi in her own district.
Yeah,
Really interesting.
that's cool.
And the problem is when you challenge any Democratic incumbent in the House, or even especially the head of the Democratic Party right now, in the legislative branch, Nancy Pelosi,
Yeah, she's the like she's the mob head. Yeah, absolutely, totally.
yeah, what the DCCC does is for any political consultant that works against an incumbent, that works on propelling a candidate to challenge the incumbent, the DCCC will never, they will blacklist them and they will never work with that person again, or
Right.
the consultancy group. And so what that does is that enforces a rigid hierarchy of having political consultants who know how to win campaigns, who know how to organize campaigns and structure campaigns, and actually use the office once they win a campaign to affect change, they cannot work for people like progressives, people who seek to bring a new vision, people who seek to represent those disenfranchised voters. And so you have AOC, for instance, relying on Justice Democrats. They can only do so much. Nancy Pelosi, for instance, last year, 2019, not even an election year, she fundraised, I believe, almost over $80 million for the DCCC.
Wow. Yeah.
No other group can affect or can possess that much capital to run a campaign effectively and to organize a campaign effectively.
And so the DCCC, so they're an organization, do they sponsor all House members? How does that work?
So even so it's essentially the Democratic Party's election wing, or that focuses more on the wing of the party that focuses, or the wing of the DNC that focuses on winning elections, and the congressional side of things. And so it is not a part of presidential campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a part of state legislatures or governors. It is about the House and the Senate.
Okay. So even the House and the Senate, but then what do they? And they're just so they get fundraised towards, but what do they do specifically?
They help distribute money to the 400, to the
I see.
XYZ many members of the Democratic Party in Congress.
So then they do sponsor campaigns, right? So they are they the principal organization for why the Democratic Party hasn't moved politically? Like, is that what you're saying?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Are they the principal reason? Like, is that the organization that's the principal reason for why the Democratic Party has not, like, actually progressed? Is that true? Wow, that is a loaded question.
That is a loaded question.
That's also a hard question. That's such a hard question to say physically.
I think it definitely stymies having new voices.
Yeah.
And we can't know who they beat and how many people they prevented from actually.
You read Fountainhead, right? You read it?
Yes.
I read it. Do you remember how there was like the whole, God, I already forgot what his name was. The villain of that book. Who's the book?
Peter.
No. That's the thing, right? Peter Keating is not the villain. The villain is the guy that puts him on. He's the
Gail.
Gail
okay.
Wyland or something? Gail.
Yeah. Wait, no.
It's a weird reference to bring up, but I just want to because that's what I'm thinking of right now as you're saying this. I know this is supposed to be like a real, politically, Ellsworth Toohey.
Yes. The architect writer.
Yeah. So Ellsworth Toohey was that same guy who he was also, I think, he kind of would choose architects that he thought were interesting, right? So he was artificially picking people that he thought brought something interesting, or not even interesting, but he thought was maintaining the art style or whatever. Howard Rourke was this kind of guy that was very individualistic, and he was never chosen by the establishment, right? That was what Toohey was. I'm sorry, it's completely out of context.
No. This is actually a really great analogy for anyone who's read the book.
Yeah, and also and it's funny because I'm certain that AOC would never be caught dead reading the Fountainhead, right? It's not really a book that any Democratic or any progressive politician would ever want to read, and that's fair. That's another thing. Maybe that's another episode. I don't know. But yeah, is that kind of what they are? Is the DCCC Ellsworth Toohey? Is that what they are?
To fit it into the narrative of the Fountainhead, yes.
Yeah.
No, well, it's interesting. Ellsworth Toohey was actually based off a British democratic socialist.
What? Really?
When Ayn Rand was writing it, yes.
Oh. Oh, yeah. In the context of who she is, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because she's that kind of person. Cool.
Yeah. But what that ultimately boils down to, the Ellsworth Toohey of the Democratic Party.
Right.
New voices aren't brought in.
Yes.
People who don't really, because who do Congress members interact with? Other Congress members,
yeah,
staffers, and lobbyists.
Yeah.
They don't because they're in DC all the time, or because they're
They don't have to
fundraising all the
interact
time.
with their voters. They don't have to interact with
Exactly.
people. Yeah.
And so there's a few different polls I was researching before about how inaccurate congressional staffers and congressmen and women were at uh, really understanding what the American people want. So in terms of predicting how many people wanted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, Republicans way overestimated it, and uh, Democratic staffers and congressmen thought it was much lower than what it actually was in terms of gun
So
reform.
both political parties were out of depth with their
Yes, and this
voting.
is for every major issue:
Yeah,
tax cuts,
that makes so much
gun
sense.
reform,
Yeah,
climate change,
yeah,
all these hot button issues,
yeah,
all these issues that matter to a lot of voters. They don't know how strong people's opinions are.
yeah. It's weird because I think that with a lot of partisanship, right? Both political parties are being driven, um, not even ideologically, not even necessarily ideologically, like to whatever side they are, but more in a stubbornness kind of way. Like a Democrat will now have to staunchly defend their position instead of
Mhm.
being more lenient with whatever they like or whatever topic that they're addressing. So I guess in that way that makes a ton of sense, right? If you're a Democrat, you're probably gonna like think that voters you're probably gonna first you're definitely gonna think that whatever a Republican says is wrong, right? Like if you're a Democrat, a Republican is uh, a devil, most likely. And then I guess you're going to assume that whatever political position you have, all your voters replicate that immediately and in like the
Mhm.
exact same way, which is fascinating because that can't be true, right? Because I think just statistics wise, right? Like statistically, most voters are probably going to be more moderate than anything in any sort of issue. And so I guess the more partisan each political party becomes, they're going to become more out of depth,
Mhm.
which will in turn generate more apathy, right? Like if any party
Is
leader,
that necessarily the case? Because, and
which one?
this is
I'm
a
just throwing things out.
huge, yeah, no, don't worry. But this is a huge question, at least in the last cycle that we saw. By Bernie Sanders is catering to progressives and to people who are disenfranchised and out of touch, or not out of touch, but to people who feel that politicians are out of touch. Did he neglect the moderate side? Would moderates, if Bernie Sanders won, then become the new disenfranchised base?
Oh, in that way,
Who really
yeah,
is this? Yeah.
that's
Um.
interesting. Well, Bernie is interesting because I think Bernie's support group, and this is just a theory that I had read, and so I'm not even sure, but what I do sometimes, and I think I'm certain I'm not the only one, but I'll read something and then I'll convince myself of it later. Like, yeah, no, that's true. But like, it was the idea of like maybe Bernie's support group was in the same way of like they were so staunchly in their own views that sometimes they weren't even that I think that they weren't necessarily representing the best interests of everyone. I don't think it's very possible to say like if Bernie won, all the moderates would have been like these disenfranchised voters because Bernie's political views were so radical that they never would have passed. So it's never like he would have been completely out of depth
Mhm.
with everyone. But in that
Yeah,
same
and
sense,
that's the argument, though.
yeah, we don't know what the Democratic Party is, right, in terms of its
Mhm.
voters, right? We only hear from the far left and then the far right version of whatever the
The middle.
Democratic Party is, the middle, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones responding to the far left. But I don't know who most people are because I
Yeah.
myself, right? Like like a Bernie supporter will say, yes, free college, free like electricity,
Healthcare,
free health, yeah, free healthcare.
not
I don't
electricity.
know what I'm saying. But like there will be a lot of positions where it'll be like this has to be completely subsidized, and then you'd have to ask the question, well, who pays for it, right? How does that get paid for? And then the response is like, well, Wall Street gets bailed out. What? Huh? And it's like, okay, sure, yeah, businesses get bailed out, but businesses also provide economic growth. It's not necessarily true that a university education will provide you economic growth. That's not 100% true. It's not necessarily true that providing free healthcare for everyone will do that. And like, you have to go through the rounds of this. And I'm not saying that I believe necessarily either side of this view, but what I'm saying is that I don't know where most of the party sits, because I feel like most of the party is silent about a lot of these things, you know?
Mhm.
And like the far left are very vocal about what they're saying. And then
But so are the moderates too.
the far middle are very vocal. But I don't know what the
Or just the
percentage is.
middle, very middle,
The
I
very
guess.
so that's what we're gonna coin this phrase right now. It's April 18th, 2020. The phrase "very middle" has now been coined as the as the moderates of the Democratic Party. No, but what I mean is that like the moderates are vocal, but but there are still people in between, right? There are people
Mhm.
that have political positions that they agree with from Bernie, and then that they agree with from, well,
And I think that's what
Biden
the
can't
space
remember
that
his positions, but still.
no, but the space that Elizabeth Warren took up early on in the race, and
That
that
would have been,
Kamala Harris took
that
up,
would have been
I
cool.
think that's where the majority of the Democratic Party is
That's what we
like
think,
right now.
right? But again, I
I
still
think
don't know.
again,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I think they support change to the left, but not in that dramatic fashion.
yes,
Um,
yes.
anyways,
Then you
I think
Fidel Castro thing, and then that was like just a weird moment, right? Like, was it overblown? Actually, I'm not
I
gonna.
think so. I think so. But
No, no, the thing is, like, as soon as I was about to say yes, I was also thinking like, but was Fidel Castro like a great person? No, like,
I
so
think
yeah,
we're getting a little bit off track. So shifting gears,
we are. But we've talked
and
about,
that's okay.
so what have we talked about, right? We've talked about a little bit of the fear of incumbents, right? We talked about political apathy as two possible reasons why our elections are broken, and it's important to note that they feed into each other, right? It's hard to
Mhm.
separate these things into discrete sections, which we're attempting to
Mhm.
do. But like again, if you're politically apathetic, then the voters that are left are going to be the voters that'll vote for the same people, and thus you
Regardless,
get,
really, of what
yeah,
the
of what
nuances
they
of what they
do.
stand for.
And
Yeah.
thus you get the concept of incumbents, right? They pander in the exact same way. They promote like, you know, finger licking good. I don't know what that's like KFC. Sorry,
That is KFC.
but they promote the same kind of image of whatever they're going to do, and it doesn't matter, right? And they get voted, and they are incumbents, and thus radical change is hard. And then political apathy again gets perpetuated to
Or not
some
even radical change, just
change.
some change
Just
that
some
align with
change.
a majority of Americans.
That could be the political campaign of a lot of politicians, and maybe they'd be successful. Shlok Sharma, just some change, please. Yeah, but there was another topic that we had that we thought, right, was very interesting about why our political process is so broken. You can kind of intro it, because I think there's a lot. This is definitely more conceptual of a topic,
Yes, no,
so I like it
definitely.
a lot more. Yeah.
um, this is more just how we actually vote.
Yes.
Um, so there's the primary process, in which you find out who is going to be, I don't know, the representative of the Libertarian Party, who is going to be the representative of the Republican Party, Democratic Party, hell, maybe even Green Party. And then, of course, you can have your own people, like people running in to their own, like as independents, as Bernie Sanders has done, and as the senator from Alaska has done in the past, Murkowski.
Mm-hmm.
She's interesting. And what we can see is the system we have right now. Well, some states have caucuses for presidential primaries. For the most part, it's one vote, one candidate. Will you waste that on even just looking at the primary process for the presidential campaign, just because there are a lot more notable voters and because those notable nominees, and because those nominees relate to everyone rather than the 13th district of New York, for instance? Um, would you waste your vote for Tulsi Gabbard or Andrew Yang when you really like those candidates? Or would you vote for someone that's more possible of actually winning, like
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren?
that's the core of electability, right? Like
Mhm.
it's
Not even just electability of the uh, Donald Trump or the general election, Donald Trump versus you, but also can you stand out against your own rivals within the party?
yeah, because there's a whole thing of like I don't want to waste my vote. I want my
Mhm.
vote to count, which has always infuriated me for a
Yeah.
separate reason, right? Because like if enough people who said I want my vote to count voted on what they actually cared for, maybe we'd have radical change anyway. But yeah, voting systems themselves are they're a little bit boring. By the way, Andrew Yang, like he promoted ranked choice voting systems, which is
Mhm.
what we're going to get into for good
Yeah.
reason, because I think he knew it would help himself. But like, yeah, that's
No, but even then, it just targets the ranked choice voting system. Essentially, there are different models of this, and different countries have different systems. And so, in its core, a ranked choice voting is, let's say we have three candidates.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know.
No, yeah, let's break this down. Yeah, so let's
Yeah,
put Nancy Pelosi, AOC, and Mitch McConnell.
yeah.
Shit,
So all running for the first.
Green Party presidential candidate.
So let's say you hate McConnell,
Mhm.
absolutely hate him. I
Yeah.
wouldn't blame you. He is.
Yeah, honestly, this is a thing that I want to bring up. This is a slight aside. On the last kind of two-parter episode or whatever we're calling these things, I said that he was like a cute turtle thing. The more I've read about you sent me that article that I read about him, and the more that I've thought about him, I'm like, that's a despicable turtle. That's just a weird turtle guy. That's an insult to turtles. But yeah, continue. Yeah,
Anyways,
so you hate Mitch
um,
McConnell, right?
mhm.
He's number three.
AOC's AOC's fine,
Yeah,
but you love Nancy Pelosi. What you would do with the bank chase voting
yeah.
is Nancy Pelosi would be your first choice, then AOC, then McConnell. So let's say one variation of this is whoever gets the 50% threshold first.
Hmm.
So let's say Nancy Pelosi, let's say that McConnell gets 40% of people's first choice, AOC gets 30%. I don't know if my math is going to add up. 31%, and then
Well,
Nancy
I'll
Pelosi
write
gets
these things
29%.
down actually. I'm writing these things down right now. Could you start over? So
So let's say
Nancy Pelosi's ranked first, AOC's ranked second, Mitch
mhm,
McConnell's ranked third on your ballot, right?
in my ballot.
Yes.
But let's say that in the first round, McConnell gets 40% of people's first choice. Uh, AOC gets 35%, and then Pelosi gets 25%.
Yes.
Nancy Pelosi would be out, and then people's second choice for myself and for the other people who put Pelosi as my first choice would go to the second choice. So then, if enough, essentially keep on doing that until one person gets above 50%.
So just for this example to work, right? I want to break it down because I've always been interested in this and like I've
Mhm,
never thought about this conceptually, but sure, right? McConnell got 40% first votes,
mhm,
AOC got 35% first votes, and Nancy Pelosi got 25% first votes.
mhm.
So now
So
you
this
take that.
25% would be distributed to the other two candidates,
But it would be
depending on the
distributed.
second
It
choice.
would be distributed based on like the people that voted for Nancy Pelosi. Those that 25%. Who did they put as their second choice?
Exactly.
And now, if all of them put as their second choice AOC, then suddenly
Mhm.
AOC goes from 35% to 60%. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
math checks
We're
out.
not.
I don't need to be Andrew Yang to say that,
Yeah.
but
But yeah, 60%. Right? So
Mhm,
now she wins. Now
mhm,
but then for another example, right, if all of them put McConnell as their second choice, then it's 65% McConnell and 35% AOC. And then you can see how that gets distributed over and
mhm.
over, right? And that's good.
Mhm.
That it allows for a fairer process. But how would this affect campaigns? How would that change the way politicians work now?
So, for example, with the Democratic Party, with the presidential party nomination process, some states had a caucus system, which was similar to ranked choice voting,
Yeah.
such that, except that you moved around. It was kind of weird.
Maine is
Um,
that state. Are you talking about Maine or
no, no, no. Iowa, for instance, has a caucus system, and
okay.
that's what a lot of it's moving around
Mhm.
with groups and trying to be convinced by other people and trying to convince other people to join your side. So what they have is a 15% threshold. In the first round, you go for whomever you want. Let's say if you have under 15% of your candidate, in the second round, the people whose candidates got under 15% get to move to the other candidates,
Mhm.
or just choose not to vote again. Um, but essentially, you have a similar model where you can vote for Andrew Yang as much as you want,
Yeah.
but but if he doesn't have that 15% support, you can still feel like your vote matters by choosing Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or someone else who aligns, who would
As your
be a
second choice. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So you can support
and
multiple candidates at once, and it also motivates the candidates instead to
have a bigger
accomplish
appeal.
change. Yeah, to
Yeah.
go for a broader appeal.
Hmm.
There's no idea of a plurality anymore, right? Like,
Yes, exactly.
and
Well,
that's
that's
kind of
different in the
important.
caucus system. In a ranked choice system, there's no plurality. There's only majority.
Yes, and the distinction between the two, even though it may seem elementary to you, is kind of important because
Hmm.
I mean, all right. So let's break this down just like a easy aside.
Yeah.
Right? A majority is that out of 100%, AOC wins 70% of the vote, right? In a contest between like three people. She
Hmm.
wins 70%, she won the majority of the vote. A plurality instead would be that, in this example, right? AOC wins 60, no, AOC,
40%.
AOC wins 40%. McConnell wins 35%, and then Nancy Pelosi wins 25%. None of
Hmm.
them found the majority of the vote to support them, but they
But
still got enough people to support them, just
mhm,
more than anyone else. Right.
yes. And so what that means, though, and the problem with that is that what is it? In that example that Shlok used, 60% of people did not vote for AOC.
Yes. Yes.
They could have been she could have been the third choice for a majority of that people. Those
Yeah, that's
people.
an important distinction to make. Yeah, because 60% of people not voting for AOC strategically, right? And I'm sure no politician sets out to lose 60% of the vote, but I think strategically AOC could just say that I know how they're going to split the ticket. I know how they're going to split the vote, excuse me. I instead can just focus on getting my group of people. I just need
Hmm.
enough voters to vote for me so that I have more than anyone else.
Hmm.
That's all that
And
matters.
that's kind of what we saw after Nevada, for instance.
Hmm.
The moderate vote was split between Klobuchar, Pete, and Biden,
Hmm.
whereas Sanders had his far left position all to himself.
Yeah.
And so what we saw as soon as those two candidates, Klobuchar and Pete, left and supported Biden, he was able seemingly overnight to coalesce this broad support. They
It's
might not
because
have
the
been.
majority vote always had the, not the majority vote. What is going on? The moderate vote always had the majority almost, but it was just that
Yes.
the plurality system before allowed Sanders to win. Had it
Mhm.
continued that way, Sanders would have likely been our nominee. Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could see that with Trump at least.
Yeah.
Because what is it? Oh god,
Oh,
I'm
great
forgetting this.
example. Yeah. Yeah. Ted Cruz,
Jeb Bush,
Jeb Bush,
Kasich.
Jeb, Jeb, Ted Cruz, Kasich, Jeb Bush, and Trump. Right. Those are the four
Yeah.
people. There were
Essentially, I think, yeah.
Marco
A lot on
Rubio.
this.
There were tons of
Yeah,
others.
but they all split, or
Yes.
the non-Trump voters, or the non-Trump candidates, all split the non-Trump vote.
Yeah.
To the point where Donald Trump was finally able to overcome all of them by amassing enough support to essentially diminish
Yeah.
his ever
Now we
winning.
should also make the distinction clear that at towards the end, I actually want to know, right? Because at the beginning, Trump's success is probably a combination of having a really like a huge political fervor or amongst his supporters, even though that they were possibly small in number compared to like what the majority of the party was, right? The
Hmm.
majority of the party would have voted for either Kasich or Cruz or Rubio or Jeb or Christie. Jeb or Christie to pick one.
Chris Christie, yeah.
Yeah, but once they started dropping out, it should be noted that Trump did win the majority of the party, right?
Hmm.
And so
Eventually, yeah.
eventually there was a delta that Sanders never made, right? Sanders never made that
Hmm.
difference, but Trump somehow did.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And we could have our own episode
yeah.
comparing the two,
That's
but I
another.
don't think, yeah, I don't think we're going to go that route.
No, no.
um, I think ultimately, there was also different systems in place too. There was a winner-take-all system.
Could you explain that?
Yeah. So what we saw in the Democratic Party this year is that, for instance, Iowa, Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders won pretty much the same amount of votes.
Mm-hmm.
They split the amount of delegates Iowa had in half.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in 2016, I believe this is right. I might be wrong, so this could be the idiocy part of this.
We've had enough.
But yeah, but Donald Trump was able to win states by a plurality, but to win all of the delegates.
You know what? Winner takes all is actually really self-explanatory. but, but yeah, I mean,
Well, just contrasting it with like how it works now.
absolutely, yeah. Iowa was such a weird mess up too. That was weird this year.
Yeah.
It was. It seemed. It was really. I don't know. Encumbered by like it was really confusing just to see who won.
Hmm.
I don't think we'll ever get into this topic just how because there's just such little information. But anyway, the voting systems themselves, the ranked choice voting system would be kind of interesting. Maine has this in place, right?
Maine recently started doing this,
Yeah.
yes. Not in the caucus system where you have to move around and the process is really messy, as we saw with Iowa, but exactly what we described about what's your first choice, who's your second choice, who's your third choice.
Yeah.
What that allows ultimately also is that you can have more insurgents, people who are not incumbents running because they think they have a chance. You
Yeah.
bring more voices into the process,
Yeah.
and incumbents are still protected by their income, like just by having a better name recognition.
Yeah. Exactly. And the ranked choice voting system would be great because then, yeah, as you said, providing more voices would also force, it would almost force candidates to appeal to each other in a way, right? Like if an
Mhm.
Andrew Yang comes in who starts talking about UBI on his platform and he starts to get a lot of support, but it's not enough for him to win the majority, then you'll see that Joe Biden will think that it'll make a lot of sense for him to mention giving $1,000 a month as a possibility,
Mhm.
just to
Well,
sort of
yeah,
see. Yeah, and that
and
way.
that's kind of what we're seeing with Biden right now. I think there was an interesting,
Yeah,
a really interesting commentary. I forgot who originally said it, but Biden is one of the first candidates to move uh, further left, for instance, with Democrats after winning the nomination.
yeah,
So what we usually see is them turning moderate, trying to win over, moderate independent voters.
yeah.
We're
Well,
seeing
I mean,
Biden
Biden,
try and win.
yeah, Biden
Yeah.
was already kind of at that place anyway. And plus, I think because the primary was so contentious between Biden and Bernie, in that sense, it makes sense for him to do that. But
Hmm.
it's fascinating to see what's happening with him because you're seeing a guy with no policy positions developing them overnight. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fun.
I
Ooh,
think also, and this goes into just going back into money. We can have an entire episode, entire series
yes,
dedicated to money in politics. I think other people do that much better than we could,
yeah,
which is why I tried to focus more on just the DCCC and the fact that insurgents have a hard time beating incumbents
mm-hmm.
because of the uh, inherent
Unfairness.
advantage they have. Yeah,
Yeah.
unfairness. You could be called rigging. You could be called um, what
Yeah,
else?
they're rigging the system in favor of incumbents and
Yeah,
against change, which is kind of
it doesn't create
infuriating.
faith in the
Yeah,
system.
yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
in that way, honestly, it shouldn't create faith in the system because that is a terrible system. It's kind of a miracle that an AOC can even exist, right?
Hmm.
Like it's a miracle that grassroots funding can work. But what's also true is that, and this is something that's really cool is that I think because of the internet and because of just it's easier to connect with people instantaneously. Um, that's such a weird phrase for me to say. It was never possible to connect with. Well, that's not true either. What am I saying? Because you
It's
cannot
okay.
connect
Stick
with
with it.
anyone instantaneously, right? Because that's now possible. Political campaigns can now be conjured up, and political fervor can now be created around a certain candidate that's against the establishment, and that's really awesome. And so
Mhm.
I have a lot of faith that change will happen, especially because of efforts like Swing Left, like that organization as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Them too.
like there are a lot of leaders out there that are doing a lot of good work, right? Abdul Al Sayed, the guy in Michigan, who
Mhm.
even though he didn't win the what a fun word, gubernatorial seat, even though he isn't governor of Michigan right now, he still is working very hard politically. AOC's chief of staff as well. I
Mhm.
forgot his name. I follow him on Twitter. He says a lot of cool things. But even though he's also like, even though he's not working with AOC right now, he has his own political organization that he's working with. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of outside change that's happening, specifically
Mhm.
focused on grassroots
Yeah. And this is really
funding.
interesting to note. I probably should have done this earlier, but the average money spent on a campaign for a House seat to represent 600,000 people in one district
Mm-hmm.
is about $1 million to run a campaign.
Yeah, yeah,
And to do that every 2 years,
yeah,
who funds the campaign? Where do you get that money from? The DCCC for incumbents has largely helped support that.
yeah.
Um, Even AOC, for instance, now because of her incumbent status as a Democrat, as a member of the Democratic Party, gets some of that money. Um,
That's funny, actually.
yeah, it is. And
Yeah,
she benefits from the same blackballing and blacklisting system that the
yeah, she would.
DCCC uses.
Wow.
But of course,
You
I
know
think
what?
that's
2018 AOC is a miracle. 2020 AOC will happen, and that's fun. But all
yeah.
right, yeah,
Um, no, but what I want to say about that is that these outside groups, one of the biggest things they're doing is providing the framework, providing an analogous framework as the DCCC does, without rigging the elections, or without
yeah.
just protecting their people unnecessarily. And like Justice Democrats, the organization I keep on going back to, has helped run campaigns, has helped organize campaigns to help win elections, whether they've been successful or not. I think their success is more a question of how much people enjoy like a reflection of how of their appeal to their policies, but they still have certain voices propelling those policies, which I think is good. Even if we don't pass Medicare for all, it is still really, it helps create faith in the system when you can see a candidate to come in second place for the Democratic Party nomination, propelling that, like with that issue as one of
Absolutely.
the centers of his campaign.
I mean, he did come in second place last time as well,
True.
but but he motivated a lot of people to jump in the election this time, and
Mhm.
whether it's genuine in some cases or ingenuine in other ways. Like I speak a lot about Andrew Yang. I've said that so many times in just one kind of session. But
Yeah.
I mean, Yang was inspired by Bernie, right? I'm sure
Mhm.
was Gabbard inspired by Bernie? She seems like she would be, probably. I
She
don't.
endorsed Bernie in 2016. She did not in 2020 though. So I
Oh,
think
what
so.
happened? Oh, okay, all
Not
right,
sure.
huh? But yeah, I mean, Bernie is in many ways he was like a beacon, right? He still is a beacon. He's
Mhm.
alive, and it's good. I mean that is as sometimes I think that that's even more valuable than if Bernie
One.
had just won because Bernie can
Yeah.
now motivate a whole class of politicians
Mhm.
to sort of come out, which is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really nice note to end it on.
Yeah, absolutely.